Over 2,000 years ago, a bright object lit up the night sky above what is modern-day Israel and Jordan. 3 Magi are said to have been inspired by a star in the west and would travel to Jerusalem to meet King Herod, of whom they would ask, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." Indeed, that star was the famous Star of Bethlehem, and according to a paper from 1992 by British physicist and Bible scholar Sir Colin J. Humphreys, that star that was spotted by the Magi was actually a hyperbolic comet. Hyperbolic meaning that it has an orbital eccentricity value of 1 or above. Essentially, it has been flung out the solar system. This hypothetical comet has been designated as X/-5 E1 and is too far away to be identified today. It is also not the only hyperbolic comet we will talk about today, because these are some of the most famous comets in recorded history. One of the most famous comets in recorded history is Halley's Comet. Just a quick side note here, the pronunciation of Halley has always been a minor debate, but the correct saying is Halley. But Halley, and to a lesser extent Hawley, have also been used. The first near certain recorded observation of Halley was around 240 BC in ancient China, mentioned in a text called the Shiji. Ancient astronomers had reported seeing a luminous object and described it as a broom star that was first seen in the east and then last seen in the north. But the exact words from the Shiji have not been fully translated and verified. I found multiple sources trying to translate the Shiji, and it gave me some conflicting results. I will take what I think is the most convincing result. The Babylonians, the Romans, the Jews, and the Syriacs, to name all but a select few, all documented Halley's Comet for the next millennium. It was believed to have been an omen during its 1066 appearance, as Harold II of England would die at the Battle of Hastings later that year. Halley was even represented on the Bayeux Tapestry as what appears to be a sun with rocket staging that you would probably see out of Kerbal Space Program. The complete history of Halley's Comet would merit its own video. It is the most famous comet ever. For the longest time, we never understood why this comet came back every couple decades, until a man called Edmund Halley, whose namesake we gave to the comet, found that the recorded observations of the comet had to indicate that this is a regular visitor of the inner solar system. It was declared and designated 1/P Halley. Now, comet designations aren't too difficult to understand. Comets with a formal designation starting with P indicate periodic comets. That's your Halleys, your Encas, your Honda Merkos Paducaikovas, you know, those comets. These comets either have orbital periods of less than 200 years or have been observed completing multiple orbits. Then there's the designation C. This is usually reserved for non-periodic comets which have long orbital periods, and typically are only observed once before disappearing for at least a few thousand years. Good example of these include Comet West in 1976 and Comet Secchi-Linus in 1962. As mentioned before, the hypothetical Star of Bethlehem comet has a designation X/-5 E1. The X designation means that the comet has no calculated orbit. This designation is typically reserved for old comets whose orbits couldn't be determined due to poor technology. This is different from comets with the designation D, which typically means the disappearance of a periodic comet was witnessed, such as Comet 3D Biela, also known as just Biela's Comet. Finally, there is the designation I, meaning interstellar. A prime example could include 2I Borisov, which is one of the most recent interstellar objects to pass through our solar system. Halley's Comet has an orbital period of 74.7 years, which fluctuates in a span of 74 to 80 years. The Comely Comet has its common place in the mind of the common folk, as well as historians and scientists. Its next return in 2061, possibly within your lifetime, is expected to have an apparent magnitude of -03, just as bright as Alpha Centauri AB in the constellation of Centaurus. It will then return in 2134 at a magnitude of -2. Eventually, however, Halley's Comet will be flung out of the solar system in no less than a couple thousand orbits, and our descendants will have no Halley's Comet to observe. In November 1680, Gottfried Kirch, an astronomer from Coburg in modern-day Bavaria, pointed his telescope at the sky and spotted a fuzzy comet. A month later, it was seen in the night sky just north of the ecliptic. C/1860 V1, later referred to as Kirch's Comet, was so bright it was faintly visible during the bright of day, and would only disappear from naked eye vision in March of 1861. At the same time of Gottfried Kirch's observations, an Italo-Spanish Jesuit priest known as Eusebio Kino accurately charted the course of Kirch's comet. He published a book in 1861 called Exposición Astronómica del Cometa, a detailed account of his observations starting in Cadiz and ending in Mexico City. Kirch's comet is also significant for another reason, as our good old friend who invented gravity, Isaac Newton, used the comet to verify Kepler's laws, even if he did originally disagree. The comet's characteristics, such as its long tail, indicated that it was a sun-grazer. Sun-grazing comets pass extremely close to the sun during perihelion, sometimes as close as 1,000 kilometers from the surface of the sun. A significant few sun-grazers we have observed all originate from the same giant comet, which had a long orbital period and broke up after an apparition in 371 BC. This comet is the highly suspected parent body of Kreutz sun-grazers. Kreutz sun-grazers are a class of sun-grazers named after German astronomer Heinrich Kreutz, who proved that certain sun-grazing comets had the same origin. The comet of 1680 may not have been a Kreutz sun-grazer, but it was a truly remarkable sight for all who observed it. As we entered the 20th century, our ability to discover and photograph comets began to drastically improve. Suddenly, a really good artist was no longer required to show everybody what that fuzzy star with a dusty tail looked like. In fact, it was the late 19th century that our cameras finally were able to take clear photographs of comets. For example, this image of C 1882 R1-A, a Kreutz sun-grazer photographed by Scottish astronomer David Gill at the Royal Observatory in Cape Town, South Africa. The 20th century couldn't come sooner. 1910 saw the long-awaited return of Comet Halley, and it was not only photographed for the first time, but the photographs allowed for spectroscopic data to be collected and studied. Earth then went through an event where it passed through the tail of the comet, resulting in some truly amusing anecdotes. With the discovery of the toxic gas cyanogen in Halley's tail, French astronomer Nicolas Camille Flammarion had believed that the gas would impregnate the atmosphere and that it would possibly snuff out all life on the planet. Of course, this was complete p***. Those who were of higher than average intelligence didn't buy into this statement. I mean, Flammarion probably didn't believe this. I can't tell whether he's credited as a professional troll or a total pillock, but regardless, his statement created a stir in society. People were panic buying gas masks, anti-comet pills, and some people were even committing suicide, fearing that death was inevitable. Famous American author Mark Twain, who was born in November 1835, the year Halley had reached its perihelion last and was visible from Earth, stated in his 1909 autobiography, quote, "I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835. It is coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it. It will be the greatest disappointment of my life if I don't go out with Halley's Comet." Mark Twain would die of a heart attack on April 21st, 1910, around a month before the comet's closest approach with Earth. The 1990s saw two great comets, Hyakutake and hale-bopp, with the former being massively outdone by the latter. There was also Comet Schumacher-Levy 9, not a great comet, but a comet that got ripped to bits after being captured by Jupiter. It eventually collided with Jupiter in 1994. But this video is on great comets, so let's start in early 1996 in Kagoshima, Japan, where amateur astronomer Yuji Hyakutake scanned the skies with a set of binoculars. He had discovered another comet just a few weeks ago and was re-observing that same patch of sky when, unexpectedly, he found another comet. Whilst the first comet that Hyakutake spotted never became visible with the naked eye, the second comet would become a spectacle in the night skies of 1996. Hyakutake was visible to observers in the northern hemisphere, and some observers in the southern hemisphere near the equator. But whilst the flame of excitement for Hyakutake was burning, another comet was slowly but surely preparing to take the spotlight. Back in 1995, on July 23rd, a man called Alan Hale was observing the night sky from his driveway in Cloudcroft, New Mexico. Originally planning to observe Comet d'Arrest, a periodic and dim Jupiter-class comet, he happened to stumble upon a previously undiscovered fuzzy object near the Messier 70 globular cluster. Alan Hale then emailed the Central Bureau for Astronomical Telegrams to inform them of his new discovery, providing regular updates on the comet's position in the sky. On the same night, another man called Thomas Bopp had also found this little fuzzy glow while specifically looking at Messier 70. It's important to mention that Bopp didn't own this telescope that he was using, whilst Hale did. Thomas Bopp was using a 17.5-inch reflecting telescope belonging to his good friend Jim Stevens. Unlike Hale, he contacted the Central Bureau with a telegram, which got into the hands of British astronomer and Bureau Director Brian G. Marsden, who said the following: "Nobody sends us telegrams anymore. By the time that Bopp's telegram got here, Alan Hale had already emailed us 3 times with updated coordinates." Formerly designated C/1995-01, but will come to be known as Comet hale-bopp. As you can see from the multitude of images displayed, this comet was a worldwide phenomenon. It was visible with the naked eye for a record 569 days, around 18.5 months. I have heard many stories from those who observe the comet. For example, my father said that when he used to travel for football, he saw the comet on the way to and back from where he played. Yes, you could see it from the lights of a city. As you can tell, this was a decade-defining moment. Despite the Heaven's Gate cult partaking in a charlatanic ritual where members and the leader would poison themselves believing hale-bopp to be a vessel of some sort, even Alan Hale said himself, quote, "We are probably going to have some suicides as a result of this comet." Back on the topic of hale-bopp, it is listed as the Great Comet of 1997, and for good reason. An object that bright and visible for that long isn't anything to scoff at, so it shouldn't have been in doubt that it would be referred to as a great comet. The 90s had brought an end to the Cold War. Nelson Mandela became the first black president of South Africa as apartheid was lifted. The launch of the Hubble telescope, the rather shammy acquittal of O.J. Simpson, and don't forget, the greatest comet ever observed. The 2000s and 2010s only brought us 2 great comets. This period is one of jubilation, but also of bitter heartbreak. By far the brightest comet of the 2000s was C2006P1, also known as Comet McNaught. Discovered on August 7th, 2006 by Robert McNaught, who was simply exceptional. He has discovered nearly 82 comets and 483 minor planets in his career. Comet McNaught is also a perfect example to cover something known as forward scattering. Forward scattering is when photons emerge from the scattering medium travelling predominantly in the same direction as it entered. Essentially, dusty tail, sunlight goes through the dusty tail, light reflects off the dust, making it brighter. A good example of forward scattering would be this famous picture of Saturn from Cassini. Yes, I know that this is the first image from the forward scattering Wikipedia page, but it was also the first example in Google Images, so give me a chance. I'm here to speak, and not here to teach. Comet McNaught was mainly visible to observers in the southern hemisphere in early 2007. It was visible during the brightness of day in the northern hemisphere, as displayed by this video from the canton of Appenzell in Switzerland. By far the best photos I've taken in Space Engine are of Comet McNaught. Nearly 4 years later, in 2011, the appearance of C2011W3 was noted, a Kreutz sungrazer discovered by the famous Australian astronomer Terry Lovejoy. His namesake was also given to this comet, hence this comet be known as Comet Lovejoy. The comet was observed by a plethora of probes as it made its closest approach to the sun's surface. Comet Lovejoy would move at a peak speed of 536 km a second at perihelion. That's roughly the distance from Jerusalem, Israel to Hurghada, Egypt, and it travelled this distance in one singular second. This resulted in a truly bright and long tail, a common characteristic of Kreutz sungrazers. Comet Lovejoy was commonly referred to as the Great Christmas Comet of 2011 due to its apparition's proximity to the holidays. The very next year, another comet was predicted to be even better than Comet Lovejoy. It was discovered on March 8, 2012 by a Ukrainian amateur astronomer called Vladimir Bezugli. He was browsing publicly available images produced by the SWAN instrument aboard the SOHO spacecraft. It was noted that this comet was the first Kreutz sungrazer to be visible in SWAN photographs. Not even Comet Lovejoy, one of the brightest Kreutz sungrazers of all time, was visible in photographs taken from the same distance. This meant that there was cause to believe that C2012 E2 SWAN, if it survived perihelion, would be an exceptionally bright comet. Comet SWAN wouldn't make it to perihelion. It would break up and not be visible in the sky. Throughout the rest of the 2010s, other minor comets put on light shows throughout the rest of the 2010s. Nothing worthy of the Great Comet magnitude. And heading into 2020, there had been a seemingly Great Comet drought. In 2020, society came to a screeching halt. I was an edgy teenager who hated school and really wanted to go pro in Overwatch. But whilst I was raging online, breaking keyboards, the next great comet was hurtling towards the inner solar system. C2020F3, commonly referred to as just Comet Neowise, was the first I ever saw with my naked eye, and also the first comet I ever photographed. Granted, it's not a spectacular photograph, but I had a phone that was probably made by children in Yemen, so you can't blame me for the photo quality. I merely edited it so the tail would look a bit more apparent. Neowise was an international phenomenon. Those in the Northern Hemisphere couldn't leave their house unless they were essential workers or going out to shop. So, these observers would look in the direction of the constellation of Lynx and see this comet shining with all its glory. These are just a few of the many thousands of photos taken of Neowise. The pure excitement around the comet led to many dubbing it the Great Comet of 2020. However, others say it wasn't bright enough to merit the Great Comet title, but considering the fact that it was one of the most widely observed comets ever, plus it outshone both C2020 F8 SWAN and C2019 Y4 Atlas, two previously predicted naked eye comets by a long margin, I think it deserves the title, so it's in this video. Ever since Neowise, there have been a few notable comets, some of which I have observed, but none of which I've photographed. These include C2022 E3 ZTF, which was in January 2023, C2023 P1 Nishimura in September of 2023, and 12P Pons Brooks in May 2024. I did actually capture it in my telescope. These comets, however, pale in comparison to the so-called Great Comet of 2024, C2023-A3, also known as Comet Tsu-Chin-Shan Atlas. C2023-A3 was predicted to be a magnitude 3+ comet at perihelion, about as bright as the Andromeda Galaxy. Further predictions, however, favoured a brighter magnitude 0.9 at perihelion, with a chance of the comet being brighter at closest approach to Earth. Safe to say, the predictions were correct, and from late September till late October, Comet Tsu-Chin-Shan Atlas shone proudly. I started to write this video script on the 12th of October 2024, 2 days after I had arrived in the United Kingdom and had observed a bright aurora. I have been going outside every clear night since the 15th of October with my camera, attempting to locate and photograph Comet Tsu-Chin-Shan Atlas. I first caught a glimpse of it on October 17th at 7:08 PM in the picturesque village of Knoll, unknowingly until 7:12 PM, where I got what I believe was my first clear image of a comet since Neowise. But if we look at my first photograph from 7:08 PM on the 17th of October, if you look carefully in the bottom left of the image, it is right there. By the time this video is out, it will have been gone for quite a while, but maybe you can keep your eyes out for C2024 S1 Atlas, a sun grazer that will come to perihelion on October 28th of 2024. So, what have we learned? Well, nothing too useful. Just know that if you ever want to see one of these beautiful sights in your life, as with success, patience is mandatory. A result will come from just waiting for the right time and then pouncing on your opportunity. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you next month. Giordano out.